Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to LRIC's 15th in a series known as the Horizon Series. We started this about 2 years ago, and the intention was to look at the big things facing the livestock sector. And that's part of our mission to help create a robust future for the livestock sector. Knowing what is coming at you is a really important part of being able to determine your own future. So it's been a very successful series. We're at over 1,200 people who have attended or viewed these online afterwards. Every one of these sessions is complemented with a white paper. Chloe Neudorf does most of the work on that. I listed a co-author, have some input, and then we rely very heavily on the people who do the webinars as contributing authors as well. During the presentation, please do think of questions and send those through the Q&A function. We'll bring those forward at the end. This webinar is a little different. We're doing it as a bit of a panel, and we have two people participating with us today. Today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Karen Hand and Dr. Martin Gooch as our speakers. And the topic today is data. Simple answer, but what's the question? As founder and president of Precision Strategic Solutions, Dr. Hand has been involved in numerous research and industry projects involving the analysis and management of Canadian agri-food data, with particular focus on the statistical and geospatial analysis of animal health and production. Dr. Martin Gooch has 30 years management experience in the international agribusiness industry. He is the CEO and partner at Value Chain Management International. He holds qualifications in crop and animal production, farm management, and has an undergraduate degree in international business. Welcome, Martin, and welcome, Karen. For the record, I've known both of these individuals for quite some time, and certainly I'm pleased that they both made time out of what I know are very busy schedules to join us for a topic that I think has a lot of interest, gets a lot of discussion, but I worry sometimes how much that discussion is grounded and looking towards how to create a future. So what we thought we would do today is ask each of our panelists to respond to some questions. And I've noted to each of them that their questions the answers have to be rather succinct. So there will be time in the audience participation to expand on those answers and to ask additional questions. So I'll start it off. It seems to me that farmers, really anybody, collect data for two reasons. One is they want to, or they have to. They may want to collect data so they can have those turned into genetic evaluations or some other performance measures that help them make business decisions. They may be told to collect data as part of an on-farm quality assurance, although that actually brings up one of the differences we see in livestock agriculture. That's much more prevalent in the supply managed sectors than it is in the non-supply managed sectors. How do you see this balance of want to versus have to evolving across the various sectors of the livestock industry? Karen, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you for having me here today, Mike and Chloe, and giving me the opportunity to speak to everyone today. So welcome, everyone. So Mike, this is a really important question, and it's not an easy answer. There's a lot of tension between those who want access to the data and those who are driving and the collection of the data. So digital transformation, the increased ability of us to interconnect with machines and others through digital technologies is providing a lot of opportunities and innovation. But on the, it's really driving this digital economy. But on the other side, the tension between the two groups that want the data and those producing it is becoming bigger. And tech is really being driven by big data companies. So we don't have a comprehensive strategy that looks at how to balance this tension or how to properly and in a privacy respecting way or in a way that's fair to all of sharing that data or getting access to it. So that's what we need.
And I think I fully agree with Karen's reply about there's too much big business driving this whole discussion. And they've got profits at heart. What we need a better understanding is how agriculture can use data. Starting by why is agriculture needing data? What data? How will the data be used? All of the factors we're going to get into a little further in the discussion. For me, the two big difference between wants and have tos is that wants is where the real opportunities lie. Have tos are about compliance, which everyone needs to do. It's the wants where the opportunities are.
Good. We've had discussions leading up to this webinar, and we very deliberately chose the heading, the title for this webinar based on one of the comments that one of you made, and that is, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So data seems to be the answer we hear so often, but I think sometimes what's lost in the answer of, well, data will solve that, is the actual question that we're trying to answer. What's the opportunity, or what's the problem? How do you see that? How do you apply or rationalize this title for this webinar to the livestock sector as you've seen it?
So Mike, I think that's a very important question, and it comes and leads from what Martin was just discussing. We as a group, as humans, we have this magpie effect where we see anything that's shiny and new and it's, ooh, new toy. And we tend to do that with technologies as well. Oh, blockchain, or oh, AI. But we don't really understand the objectives. And often what we do is we let the technology lead the objectives. And we need to reverse that. We need to really understand the objectives, as Martin was saying. What do we need to solve? What data will help us solve it? What format does that data have to be? All those things that need governance around it, so that we can use the best technology to answer the objective.
I'm fortunate in quite some ways, I feel. I was doing my postgraduate studies in Australia during the time of the tech boom in the late 90s. And that led me to being interested in this relationship between virtual value chains, which we're talking about today, technology, data, information, and physical value chains, and how you can use the virtual value chain to drive increased performance in the physical value chain. And one thing we haven't done in the agriculture and food industry is sufficiently marry those two concepts. We are way behind other sectors. And just to illustrate how far we are behind in using data and IT to drive business decisions and enable better performance, in 1985, Michael Porter, who's well known, of course, for his 5 forces, co-wrote a paper and said the future of competitiveness is not going to be transforming a product from its present state into a future state. So an animal into a steak, for example. It's going to be using the information that comes from that transformation process to drive performance. We're still not there in understanding how those two concepts line up in agriculture and food.
I want to jump to a different question now, but you touched on it, Martin. I think within a truly functional value chain, data capture and return on its value, it seems almost like a natural, it just happens because it makes sense, it's logical. I wonder sometimes, are we making such, in my opinion, slow progress in data and livestock because of our market structure and what I think is probably a true lack of true value chains? What are your thoughts on that?
Value chains come in different forms. And I do not buy for a moment into this concept of supply chain versus value chain. For me, that it's beyond today's discussion. There's not one form, not one type of value chain. There's multiple types. And it's about understanding for me, determining the best technology for your situation, start by mapping out what information do you need to know for what reasons, and then going back to think about, well, I need that data to collect that information and use that information. And we've been driven, as we mentioned, Karen mentioned, about big shiny things that grab our attention, and let's invest in these because they're going to make us lots of money because this marketing guy has told us they will. No, we need to take a step back. And I think in large part, we have been taken up, we've been grabbed and consumed by the marketing, the PR regarding technology and what it can do for us without understanding how we need to use it or can use it.
Yeah, so Martin raises very, very important points, and I would 100% agree with the comments Martin has made. And the one thing I would also add is that what we are also missing is we often think of technology as the holistic answer, the magic. But you know what we don't consider is the human side of technology. And that means a lot of the governance around how the data is used. What is the good data? How should we use it? What are the rules that we need to make sure that that data is being used properly, and the access and the cybersecurity? All of that relies on human relationships. So we need trust on both sides. We need to be able to identify our objectives, therefore enable us to choose trusted technologies that will answer those objectives, but also we need to provide that trust in the governance of the system that's going to use the technologies and the data.
Good. I was reviewing some research proposals recently, and in one of them, it struck me, and it's not new, but so the question is, I continue to hear researchers state that investment in data, so collection, time, money, etc., by farmers will lead to market returns. And I just see that as an absolute stretch. Okay, it's not going to happen, frankly, in today's current marketplace, the way some people say. So how do we do some bridging between researchers who are working in this field, and I'm not belittling what they're doing whatsoever, but just that and the realities of the marketplace and what farmers are facing day to day, who are looking at, like you said, Martin, well, what data do I need? What do I do with it? It's going to take time and money to collect. What are your thoughts on that?
For me, it's about raising awareness and education on both sides of the coin, because as many researchers there are IT people who are not connected to agriculture, do not understand agriculture, and they live in a bubble. And we need to educate both so we can have deeper, more meaningful conversations and get to a space where agriculture can take advantage of the opportunities that clearly exist.
Yeah, I'm going to paraphrase a quote that I really, struck me. And it's Drummond Reed at the Trust Over IP Foundation. And it's a not-for-profit that I spent quite a bit of time with. So any business, and I would say any farmer or ag organization whose interaction with customers or transacts on a digital has an opportunity to use those attributes to create business, to profit, to monetize that data in a permissioned and privacy respecting way. And why haven't we done it? For the reasons that Martin has laid out. And, we do know that producers understand farming. They're very good at that. We're not the experts in farming. The producers are the experts. They understand their markets, and current data services really leave them uncertain of the use and their ability to use it. So we need technology systems that are easy to use and producer centric, but doesn't rely on them having to create and learn and become an IT expert. So what does that mean then? Well, there are technologies out there where data can be reused from the producer. The data that's produced from the farm is often by authenticated sources like the agronomist or in the soil labs. That data is there. It's existing in really authenticated, trusted data sources. Is there not a technology that we can use to promote farmers' best management practices and what they're doing through the use of those technologies? And in fact, there are. And I see the importance of this, especially when we're looking at the carbon economy.
So I agree, Martin. It's almost as if we're emerging, dividing into two worlds. To those who truly understand the IT and put that good thought into governance and et cetera, et cetera. We've got people I put over there too who are focused on capturing data efficiently and automated, and all of that is incredibly important. And then we've got the the person at the ground level who's looking at that day-to-day decision making. And it's I think in the last 20, 30 years, those have evolved to the point where it's getting harder to bridge them. And I think I totally agree. We do need to bridge them. If you were given the challenge of helping to bridge those, how would you do it?
Oh, you're on mute, Karen.
Thank you, Martin. So for myself, And this is something that I've talked about for a number of years now, ever since I did the user needs assessment for the Ontario Agri-Food Technologies Group, where we were looking at the use of data and technologies through all major commodities, right from producers, their associations, their trusted advisors, government, academia. The original purpose of that study was how many servers should we buy? But in reality, the purpose of the study in my mind for the user needs was what data is being generated? What do we need? How can we use this data? What questions aren't being answered? And that's the first step. But beyond that, we really need a comprehensive strategy for Canadian agri-food, and we're lacking the leadership to provide that type of governance and oversight, and to look at the technologies that will work for the sector as a whole, and respect producers as part of the system, not to be given their data away as third-party aggregators where other people benefit from it. They need to be part of that ecosystem and at the table and part of the governance structure. Their voice needs to be heard. Everyone has a story, and in governance, their story is as important, if not more, than others in the supply chain. We think about sustainable development goals. That really struck me in 2015, how a lot of it was related to agriculture. And through that, we see these rules that are coming down in terms of net zero. What happens is that we have models that are disconnected to the realities of the farm and the data and the science on the farm. So how do we start with the farm? Those who are actually creating the data, understanding where's the science in the agronomists, the nutritionists, the vets. There's so much good data out there that we could use that can be authenticated. How do we do that to build models that are actionable for farm decisions? And I think that's one thing we're really missing, that type of leadership in this big, complicated ecosystem of ag.
Yeah, I agree with Karen. We don't have the leadership, or at least the leadership we have aren't sufficiently knowledgeable of the role that data plays, the need for farmers to retain ownership of the data, and having a strategy for how to use that. And my hat goes off to, I've led 2 groups from Ontario to Australia to look at their livestock information systems, Beef Farmers of Ontario and Sheep Farmers of Ontario. And they came back with great opportunities that individuals have implemented and benefited from. The industry's benefited from it. They're not to the degree that they could have done. And part of the reason is we need to get the bigger leadership looking at how do we solve this challenge, because it's only the bigger leadership that can have the hammer, so to speak, or sufficiently push back against the technology firms who are doing their best to market all these brand sparkly solutions that cost a lot of money, and at the end of the day need not provide any value at all.
Yeah, and if I could just follow up on that, and Martin, 100%, I would say that his comments are right on. And if I was to say that leadership, where should they start? It's not even in the technology, it's in the governance and the objectives. Even that would make us one step closer to be able to use technology in an appropriate way or to bring value.
Technology is a tool at the end of the day. And as part of my studies, as you said, going back to the 90s, and it's saying, wow, 25, 26 years later, we're having this conversation. And I see the conversation has moved on somewhat, though the application of technology, I don't think has moved on that much. And there's this triangle between infrastructure, process, and product. We need to get the technology infrastructure in place, but to do that, we need to understand the overall processes that occur where we want to use data to produce information required to produce a product more effectively and efficiently. We haven't connected those 3 elements.
I've got 2 questions left, and we've used all of our time, but I'm going to ask them anyway. The first one is, it seems that there are some large players, and Martin, you mentioned large players. I read an article a couple of years ago about Google investing, I forget the numbers, there was astronomical numbers in developing cars. I scratched my head for a while, thought, why on earth is Google getting into cars? And I realized they're not cars, they're mobile data collection devices. And we've seen some moves recently in the livestock sector in Canada, where some large players are spending some large money basically just putting their hands around anything to get a hold of that is data related. I'm not sure that may pay off as an investment or a gamble for them. I don't know. But there seems to be a move in livestock agriculture now for some big players coming in with big money. I don't know if that's good or not. Any quick thoughts? Karen, you first.
Sure. You talk about that, and Domino's is a great example. When they restructured themselves and brought in all the digital technologies to deliver pizzas and all that, they then described themselves as a data company first, pizza second, right? So we're seeing a lot of that. So in the global sense and in the economic sense, there is a global drive to own the data. And the reason being is that data is going to bring profitability, money. And why is it going to bring money? It could be through aggregating of carbon credits in a market that we're not even sure if that's going to work, but they're going to buy those credits ahead of time from the farmer. And right now, I understand farmers may want to participate in those third-party aggregators because right now there's money on the table. We don't even know if those markets are going to work. And on the other side, we don't even know the disruptions that are coming in our economy and everything that's going to happen in this world right now. So everything is up in the air in terms of the value of that data, but it certainly isn't. It's being used to create brands and labels to show that I'm net zero, but the value in the data for ag is very limited. It's really not answering our questions. It's not providing transparency in the supply and value chains. It's not going to help us when we get more and more shocks and disruptions into the system because they're still so siloed and controlled and centralized.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's too much centralized control, and it isn't a new thing. So, there's big IT companies and data providers who have been behind this, pushing for some time now. And I'm going to try my best not to get on my soapbox. Though, you hear these buzzwords about these various applications that are reported to do just about everything just about everything besides making your morning cup of coffee. They all suffer from the same basic fundamental challenges, which include crap in, crap out, and lack of governance that benefits the user, just as two examples. And I think it comes back to we need to get us to take our arms around this and get a strategic perspective of it for the sake of agriculture and food. And carbon, as Karen mentioned, is beyond today's discussion. But I think that's a real Trojan horse for agriculture if we don't treat it with kid gloves and take a very thoughtful approach.
You've mentioned leadership. We've talked about things that need to happen. So work with me here. There's a bit of a fantasy question, but if you were given the role today of the czar of Ontario livestock data, make it Canadian if you want to, but Ontario livestock data, you have unlimited resources and you have power. What would you do? Let's say 3 steps. They don't have to be necessarily in order, but 3 steps that you would help us to get to that promised land where we have easy automated data collection, we have secure storage, clear ownership, clear governance, sharing, and most importantly, that it brings value to everybody that's been involved because we're all looking for value out of this. I throw it to you to see who wants to go first on that one.
All right, I can take a stab at that, Mike. I mean, for me, if I had those funds, it would be an incredible opportunity for me to realize the Canadian digital strategy. And that means I would love to see something like a co-op, because they work well in ag and they work well in Canada, and a federated organization that just starts with the basics that we've been talking about, that looks at governance structures. What do we need to govern the data to ensure that it's going to be used properly? I would say this GOOB concept, get out of the building, is so important. That means get out and talk to people, everyone across the value chain, producers especially. What do we need to answer? Where's the data coming from? How's it being generated? What questions do you need answered? If we had all the data, what questions could we answer for you? Just really understanding what we need to do. And I would say more importantly, in these times of really disruptive, shocks we saw through the pandemic, what was happening there. We've got climate change, we've got geopolitical instability, we've got social issues. We have a lot of converging crises that are really hitting the farm gate hard. So my objective would be to form that kind of cooperative or not-for-profit with, provincial hubs, because it's important to recognize that everybody has different objectives with technologies or questions that need to be answered. But overall, to get our arms around this complicated ecosystem of IT, agri-food, and data.
Yeah, I think it would be a really exciting challenge, and potentially a seismic challenge in terms of what you could do. I started my career in agriculture, working with livestock and crops. I'm passionate about agriculture, and I don't like seeing agriculture miss an opportunity. And that's what we're doing in this present state. So how would I go about it? Strategic foresight and analysis to determine what can we control, what can we not control, what can we influence for the industry's benefit, long-term benefit and success. Then you get down into how do we execute it at the operational level, and then you start talking about technology, individual technology solutions. It's down the road. We need, I firmly believe we need to take a few steps back.
And it has to be very agile.
Yeah, which is not going to be easy.
No.
Sorry, a note to participants, please do send any questions through the Q&A function at the bottom. Sadly, neither of you is going to leave this call as the czar of Ontario Livestock Data. But it begs the question, okay, we need a different, maybe a different type of leadership, but I'm not sure on roles. So we have researchers, so academia, we've got government, we've got policymakers, we have a lot of industry players. Like, industry isn't one organization, and then those industries are incredibly different. Sheep is a completely different world than dairy, for example. So leaving this webinar, if you said, okay, so who is there a party that needs to do something different, without saying I think everybody's making honest effort, but we don't seem to be making progress. What do we need to do differently? Or who should grab the bull by the horn, so to speak?
For me, it's industry that needs to grab the bull by the horns. It's not government. Government is an enabler. When they play their role correctly, government are an enabler. They have helped curate the enabling environment. It's industry that needs to take the lead. And it's not by accident that these large corporations, they have chief information officers and the like. We essentially need someone like that to take the bull by the horns in agriculture.
Karen.
Yeah, Martin's correct. It's not the role of government. In fact, oftentimes government, without meaning to, causes a lot of challenges in terms of technology use and regulatory cross-compliance issues. All of those things have to be addressed. They're part of the objectives of data that we could look at, but government doesn't need to lead, nor academia. I do believe also it needs to come from industry. And I also am a firm believer in everyone at the table.
I do have a couple of questions from participants. So the first one, does the agriculture industry need a version of EU's General Data Protection Regulation? If so, is this attainable, and how?
I think the answer is yes. I think that's where part of the role of government of creating that enabling environment that I spoke of. Of course, the data protection regulation is primarily regarding individuals' personal data. We need it at a business level, which is a certainly similar thing for individuals. But at a business level, we need something slightly different. But I think it's a model that could be used.
Karen.
Yeah, I would agree with Martin. It is a model that could be used. I think where the GDP or the government could set the rules, but what are the rules? And I think that's the role in terms of data. Those rules can be set privacy laws, but in terms of ag data, there's no laws, and the GDP does help with that. So we also still, I would say, need that governance structure led by the industry that tells government what we need for ag data, what's important to protect, what do the rules need to look like. I think that's very important. The EU also has digital economy strategies. So how to invest and interact in the digital economy. We don't have that at all. We are really behind the ball on that one, especially ag. So there's a lot of exciting activities in Europe. They fund innovation in a different way than we do in Canada, which I say is a benefit in many ways for those in the EU. So yeah, that's, I would say.
Great, thanks. Another question here. Is there any policy being pushed to incentivize further use of data in the industry? Is there anything the common folk can do to help?
Well, I'm on mute this time. There's funding programs that are, of course, pushing greater use for data, for example, in precision agriculture. But by and large, that funding policy isn't being promoted, isn't being communicated, isn't being enacted strategically. And it's not being enacted for the long term. It's like, hey, look, we're doing something. Well, doing something and actually doing something meaningful aren't necessarily the same thing. So, and of course, policies, I think it comes back to, we briefly mentioned carbon. I think there's a real opportunity and a need for agriculture to take the bull by the horns regarding all these carbon discussions and carbon policies. We have the most potential to benefit from them. And we need to encourage purposeful discussion on how we can achieve that as an industry. And part of that is the use of technology and data.
I also think there's a bigger role for our larger organizations like the Dairy Farmers of Canada and the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, all of those really trusted organizations by farmers. I think they have great ability to take that leadership role and start this off, even to start these discussions. And I think they need to be had. In terms of funding and innovation and programs, there are, as Martin says, a lot of programs, but often they're disconnected from what's actually happening on the farm. So we buckshot funding to blockchain or anything that says AI, but it's not really connected to what's going on the farm or decisions that can be made on the farm that will benefit all of us throughout, the supply chain and sustainable development goals. Again, it has to start on the farm if we're going to accrue these benefits throughout. And that piece, I think, is really, really missing in this innovation and funding space. And you know what? Sometimes these things need to be funded for 10 years. Is there any government program that's going to do that? So we need short-term funding to answer the questions today, the things that come up really quickly, like COVID. And we need long-term funding so that we're set up to be more adapted to what's coming and to look at the mitigation that could be used that might provide opportunity and benefit for us.
Yeah, fully agree.
Thank you.
Can you imagine one of these big organizations who are pushing the use of technology and have strong, experienced lobbyists and a lot of money saying, no, don't include us in any discussions about funding programs?
Mm-hmm. I have another question here. This person's agreeing that systemic and process analysis comes first before tactical solutions. The question is, do we understand for a given producer what are the 10 most important business decisions that they make during a product cycle And if we learn this, then can we group those making similar decisions to cooperate and find a way to get the actionable information, more than data, that improves those decisions? Does this make sense as a provincial first focus?
If I'm reading the question correctly, I like the idea because it goes back to, you've got to start at the building blocks. And what does a producer need to control to be able to improve the performance of his business and also mitigate as much as possible the factors he cannot control? And it goes back to what I mentioned about the idea behind Porter's co-authored paper. How do we actually understand more about the processes involved in whatever industry it is? And the livestock industry, we must remember, is unique. It's one of the few disassembling industries in the world. We take multiple components, we use them in producing a final product that is then disaggregated as it moves along the chain to a final product that's purchased and consumed by an individual like ourselves. That is complex, that's the enormous complexity, but understanding how we use those components at the get-go to produce that end product at the end of the chain consistently and predictability is the real opportunity for us. And we can only do that well by using technology and data. But it comes back to this using the virtual chain to manage the physical chain.
Yeah, and I would add also that, where do we see the biggest gains that we did in precision ag and the use of technologies? When that happened is when the technologies were applied in the context of how the farmer was farming and the objectives that they wanted to achieve. So it's not like you need to go in and throw every precision ag technology at a farm or a field. What's your objective next year? Is it to improve, organic matter? Is it to improve your yield? What does your field look like? How do you feel about your historic yields? All these pieces of information are so important in order to use technology correctly. And so, in response to that the efficiencies will come if we use it correctly, if we understand the data, and if it's used in the context and the objective of how it's being generated. And that, we have so many audits in the livestock sector. And one example is ProAction, and there's so much good data there. I mean, I can't think of another group of producers that came together to say that as producers, these are the things that we're going to do for the environment or for animal welfare, and all that great data. We need to find a way or a mechanism to govern it so that producers don't always have to put that same data on every form and refill it. Like, it's just a broken system right now. We need to be able to reuse it, provide the framework for which it's valuable, and allow people to use that data in a way that will bring them value. And then we'll see more adoption and more opportunities, even for farmers.
And more utilization of that data that exists.
Yeah.
And identifying which data do we need versus which data is just noise.
Yeah.
Certainly the livestock sector is, I think, facing some challenges with, we all face challenges with misinformation these days, but there's a huge amount of misinformation out there around the livestock sector and production, confusion over what metrics to use if you're looking at greenhouse gas produced per kilogram of product, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I really believe that the livestock sector is a key pillar of Ontario's economy, environment, and food security. I think that alone is warranting some really solid data collection to basically put up the data-backed argument of the statement that I just said. It might be seen more as a starting point and a documented, agreed upon starting point, but what are your thoughts on that as important data?
Animal livestock is a critical part, an irreplaceable part of the creation of healthy soils. That's, for me, the beginning and the end of the argument. We cannot operate, the agricultural industry cannot operate without livestock, the wider agriculture industry, because our soils will become desertified without it. So we need to, how do we utilize livestock industry as part of a healthy agriculture? And yeah, I agree, there's a lot of disinformation.
Final thoughts, Karen. We're just a bit over time, but I had to get that question in.
It's a great question. And it's all part of this disruptive environment we live in. We have social, consumer trends, geopolitical instability, all those things we talked about. But I would say that we don't even have supply chain transparency. And wouldn't that be great if we had a way of letting the supply chains understand what is normal, and not even using the data for mitigation for greenhouse and measuring, but even just start with, how can we help our farmers be adapted to things that are coming? How can we use that data to help them survive from one year to the next, whether it's a drought and they need this variety of corn, or they had to replant, or access to markets or infrastructure? We can't even put those pieces together at this moment.
The number of people, Karen, who have said they've got the solution to do that we've heard from over the years, it's like, okay, when's the next one coming in?
Karen and Martin, thank you so much. I know you're very busy people. I've really enjoyed this. Hopefully you did too. And for those watching, feel free to check out the white paper shortly on our website. And this recording will be there as well. So thanks everybody for attending, and thank you, Martin and Karen. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Karen.